Hello, my name is Andy McCright, and I work for IBM. I work on WebSphere Liberty, OpenLiberty, and in the traditional WebSphere application server. I'm also a member of, former member of the JAX-RS 2.1 expert group. I kind of came in towards the end of the 2.1 development, spec development, so I get to take all the credit and do very little of the work. I'm now a part of the JAX-RS project community now that it's been moved into Jakarta EE under the Eclipse Foundation. And I'm also a committer to the Eclipse MicroProfile project, specifically looking at REST client. So today I'd kind of want to talk about JAX-RS 2.1, what's in the spec, and what you can take advantage of today, and also look to what the future of JAX-RS is. Here's kind of our roadmap. We're going to look at two of the big ticket items in JAX-RS 2.1, which is the reactive client and ServerSent Events. We're going to briefly cover some of the other APIs. I'm going to try to show you some demos of both the reactive client and the ServerSent Events, and then we'll talk about some of the cool new things that we hope to show in future versions of JAX-RS. So. Let me just ask, I guess, how many people have written JAX-RS applications, even samples, or at least familiar with some of these concepts? Okay, so most of you. I just kind of want to, as a refresher, just so that when we get into the nuts and bolts of what's new, you have a basis for understanding where we're going. So JAX-RS has basically two types of concepts. They've got resources and providers. Resources are where your business logic is. When you issue a RESTful request, it handles it provides the content for when you do a GET request or a POST request, etc. Providers handle infrastructure tasks, and so that's going to handle things like converting HTTP entity data into an object, or vice versa, in a response. And then we've also got things like exception mappers, which will take an exception that's thrown out of your resource method and convert that into a response that's usable by the HTTP client. JAX-RS 2.0 introduced things like filtering requests with filters and interceptors. And so to kind of understand the basic flow of JAX-RS, this is taken straight out of the JAX-RS 2.1 spec. It's the same in 2.0. If a request starts, if an inbound HTTP request comes in, it goes through a pre-match container request filter, goes through a container request chain. Before it's invoked into your resource method, it's going to convert the contents of the request to objects and then invoke your resource method. After that, it's going to send a response, and it goes through a similar chain where it goes through response filters, then writes the data out to the HTTP request. And then this is what the JAX-RS client will look like. It's very similar, except that it starts here with your application. Your application makes a request. It goes through a request filter chain here, writes the data out to an HTTP stream, sends it off to a request response to the remote service, comes back, and then the response is processed in the same way. So that's how things are done in JAX-RS 2.0 and before. In 2.1, we introduced this concept of the reactive client. Hopefully throughout today and yesterday, you've gotten to see some presentations on some of the benefits of reactive programming. I'm not going to go into that too much detail, but I am going to show you the implementation that we use in JAX-RS. It's based on the Java util concurrent completion stage. It allows stages to be invoked in order. It handles exceptions in line, and it's async ready. It makes writing code a lot smoother. And what I think it does a really good job of is paving the way for future implementations. We won't talk too much about RX, Java, and Flow, but these are the things that you can plug in to the reactive client. So I'm going to show you a little bit of code here in a bit, but before that I want to kind of set it up. So in this scenario, we run a consultant shop, and we've got two microservices already. We want to track who our consultants are and what their skills are. So we have a set of
of employees who are experts in certain fields. Some may be experts in JAX-RS, some are CDI, et cetera. And we rank them from 1 to 5. This is, if you've worked in big companies like IBM, this is nothing new. We also have a scheduling service that keeps track of when a particular consultant is deployed on assignment and to which customer. And so what we want to do now is we want to make it easier to find the most qualified experts so that when a customer request comes in for a consultant at a certain date and time, that we can schedule them and book them appropriately. So first off, we'll take a quick look at the resource itself. I'm afraid that is probably not, can you guys see that okay? Probably not too well in the back. Okay, so I apologize. I'm not sure how I can zoom in here too well. I'll give you. I'll go through it and give you as much detail as I can. Essentially, we've got a basic JAX-RS service here. This is just this is the existing resource built on technology familiar to JAX-RS 2.0. Produces application JSON, and it uses GET requests, POST requests to add skills, to view skills, and then to see all of the experts that are in the system, and then to also further refine it to see all of the experts based on a given skill. You pass in a string, say we're interested in security, you pass in a string, that'll give you a list of experts with that skill. Yeah. Sorted here in order of their skill level, so from highest to lowest. Then we've got our scheduling resource, and this is our second microservice. Also looks very similar. The idea here is that now we've got this object called booking, which keeps track of the customer that has booked our consultant, the consultant that's being booked, and then the start and end date of that booking. Our resource looks, I guess, how you would expect. It's got a GET request. You can say get all bookings, look for all bookings for a particular consultant, all bookings for a particular customer, etc. And then for completeness, we've even got the ability, we have the ability to post it as well. So now to look at what a reactive client example might look like, we've got another resource here, so this is a new microservice that takes in 4 parameters. So we want to know the customer that's going to want to book a consultant is going to tell us what skill they're interested in, and then the start and end date, and then their own name, the customer name. And so to see that, this is very similar to what we've seen before in JAX-RS 2.0 with the client APIs. You create a client builder, register any provider classes. So this one will convert expert lists from the HTTP stream to a list of experts. Create the target. You can create resolve templates by using template variables here to pass in the skill that we're interested in. And then you call request. What's new, and again, probably hard to see it back, and I apologize for that, is this RX method. That tells us we are very interested in a reactive return type. So now when we call get, we pass in what type we're looking for. Instead of getting back a list of experts like we would when we were invoking JAX-RS synchronously, we'll now get a completion stage with a list of experts. Unfortunately, I'm not expert enough in Eclipse to know how to increase the font size. Let's see. Okay. All right, there we go. Thank you. So now we're getting a completion stage. And so if you're familiar with completion stage, a lot of this stuff will look pretty familiar. But what's cool about this is that this will go off
and it'll go check our list of skills, and it'll say, give me a list of all the experts that have this skill. So then we'll get that sorted list back, but now we can take that completion stage and combine it with a second request that goes off to our scheduling microservice and says, okay, now tell me who's available from this start time to this end time. And now that goes off and combines those two completion stage and can then execute this filter here, which will say, well, it'll print out, first of all, the experts in both fields. The experts that have the skill and the experts that are available. And then we can filter it and collect it into one list. Then we can call then apply on the resulting completion stage of those two and filter through those experts that are returned, basically the combined list, or I'm sorry, the intersected list, and we can go off and make a post request to then book the most highly skilled expert that's available from a certain time. So we'll go over here and we'll say, you know, hey, we're the Acme Corporation, and we are interested in JAX-RS, and we want to book somebody from July 12th through July 13th. So when I submit this request, it tells us that that the experts in JAX-RS, Al is our most senior expert. He's at skill level 5. Bob is at skill level 3, and Carl is at skill level 2. However, Al and Carl are both already previously booked on July 12th and 13th, so Bob is the only one available, so now we've booked Bob. If I refresh this and try to book somebody again, now no expert is available because we've already booked Bob for Acme. So that is that's the reactive client. And so now back to our presentation. So now let's talk a little bit about ServerSent Events. And so with ServerSent Events, they're part of the HTML5 specification. They're nothing specific to JAX-RS or even Java. One of I guess what the intent of them, of ServerSent Events, are for more like Web 2.0 applications. A lot of Web 2.0 wants to see things where something happens on the server side of it, and we want that to alert a client. So past implementations have done things with polling, which are never fun. Long polling, which is a little bit nicer, where the client makes a connection, and then once the response comes back, it may come back minutes later, but then it closes the connection. ServerSent Events is more of a concept where the client makes a single connection, and then the connection stays open while the server can send back events at its own pace and its own schedule. The connection stays open, so it's a lot more efficient. JAX-RS 2.1 provides APIs for the server and the client. We're going to primarily look at the server. If anybody's interested in some of the client APIs, feel free to come talk to me afterwards. I'll be at the IBM booth. And then the APIs provide two kind of mechanisms where you can send, basically you can broadcast an event to all registered clients, or you can just send individual events back to an individual client. We're going to look at the broadcast because we're going to look at a demo that looks like a chat, that basically is a chat application, similar to Slack or Google Hangouts. And so we'll start off with just our Pojo here, which is a chat message. And so this chat message is pretty simple. It has a message ID, it's got a timestamp, and then it's got the user that sent the message and the message text itself, and then getters and setters for all of that. Our resource class also looks pretty simple, which I like. I'm doing a few shortcuts here. First of all, the resource is also the application, and I'm using CDI to make it application scoped. The reason for that is so that the broadcaster can be a singleton, or so that it can be a singleton so that every request will show the same broadcaster. In order to register, it's very simple. You invoke a GET request by producing the ServerSent Events type that tells the runtime this is going to be a ServerSent event, so it's going to be processed in a slightly different way. And you also pass in an SSE event sync. That SSE event sync is what ties the server to the client. So when you have multiple clients invoking the same resource method, you want to hold on to these, and you do that inside of a broadcaster. So with the broadcaster, you register that sync. Now, when that sync is registered, and you later on call the broadcast method, every registered sync will then receive that same event. So down here in the put, we've got a pretty simple API as well. This one is not actually a ServerSent event. This is just a plain old resource method. Pass in the user, pass in the message. If the broadcaster hasn't been set up yet, we're just going to early exit. Nobody's listening. Otherwise, we're going to create an instance of the chat message, serialize that chat message through SSE's event builder. Make this a little wider. Build the outbound SSE event, passing in things like the media type and message IDs, and then send that to the broadcaster, and the broadcaster will send that to all registered clients. So for that, that's my previous chat. So we will be, this user will be Eclipse, and they'll send the message hello. Right now, nobody else is listening, so let's see. Sorry about this. I'm not able to get out of this window here. Emily, do you have any tips for what is how I'm not even sure how to exit at this point. How do I switch windows?
Oh, green down.
Ah, thank you. So now we'll add Firefox, and he'll say hi. And so now the hi shows up here. When Eclipse writes back, how are you? We can go back to Firefox and see that the message has been sent to both clients. I find that using curl and verbose mode shows a lot of information when it comes to HTTP requests, and so I'll enable that. And so we can see the request to the server looks very simple. It's just a simple GET request. Now Firefox will respond and say, doing well, and you? And we can see what that looks like in what the event looks like. So at this point, the server sends back a 200 response. This is the first event that curl has seen. But down here is what is the actual event. And so unless you give the event a name, it's going to use something like unnamed event or some kind of default event, and that's going to be indented by 4 spaces. That's part of the HTML5 spec. It'll then send an ID and then the data, and so in here you can see the JSON showing us what the message was that was sent. So that's the chat client. That's SSE. With that, let's see. we'll get back to the presentation now. Some of the other new APIs, definitely not as flashy or as big ticket items as the reactive client or the SSEs, but still can be kind of useful. The JAX-RS client APIs have always had the concept of timeouts, read timeouts, and connect timeouts. However, it's always been in a vendor-specific manner. You'd have to use a COM-IBM property to set it on Liberty. Nowadays, you can use connect timeout and read timeout, which makes it a lot more portable. In the expert group, we've seen a lot of requests for @patch on methods. A lot of people are using patch more often. So for example, in our chat application, if we wanted to modify the text, maybe we could use a patch application and send some kind of sed request so that it would actually modify the previous message rather than posting a new one. And that would be a great candidate for the patch annotation. Ordering of providers is now possible using @priority. That's a very nice feature because if you remember the chain that I showed early on, you might have multiple filters that are invoked, and without this @priority, you would not know necessarily which order those filters are going to be invoked in, and it may be that it works one way in Wildfly and another way in OpenLiberty. This way it gives you a standard way to prioritize those annotations and how they're invoked. I'll mention that they are in ascending order, which I think is slightly different than how they work in CDI. So priority 1 is going to be executed before priority 2 or 3 or 5 and 10 in this case. Sub-resource locators can now return a class object, and that will return, the framework will then provide an instance of that class. So you don't have to, if you're ending up newing up new objects for your sub-resource locators, you don't really need to anymore. You can just pass the class itself back. As long as it has a default constructor, the JAX-RS runtime will provide that. This last bullet, I assume a lot of people are using tools like Jackson to convert objects to JSON and vice versa. New in EE8 is JSON-B, which basically kind of standardizes that kind of technology. So now providers for JSON-B are out of the box. When you pull up the OpenLiberty beta, or I'm sorry, WebSphere beta, you'll get a JSON-B provider that will convert your objects to JSON and vice versa. All right, so that's what's in JAX-RS right now. Does anybody have any questions, or otherwise I guess we can move on to what's coming up. All right. So beyond JAX-RS 2.1, I guess I'll start off with a disclaimer. Anything I say cannot be used against me if we don't end up implementing these things. We've got a lot of fun stuff that we're working on, but until we finalized it, none of it is final. You guys have probably heard a lot about this during some of the large group sessions. Java EE is now, I guess, in the process of moving over to Jakarta EE. Most of the members of the JAX-RS 2.1 expert group are now committers in the new Jakarta JAX-RS project. And what's really cool is that we've also been able to pull in new members. And the JAX-RS community is actually one of the most active of the Jakarta EE community. And so if you're not involved and you'd like to be, I would encourage it. I'll have a link at the end for how you can get involved. Our current release planning is that the first release of Jakarta EE will be compatible with EE8. So that basically means we'll have JAX-RS 2.1. We have I guess our vNext is tentatively called JAX-RS 2.2. So we'll have some new function, but no breaking changes. Everything the hope is everything that works today in JAX-RS 2.1 and in your JAX-RS 2.1 apps will work the same in 2.2. But the next major release we'll tentatively call 3.0. Expect some breaking changes. One of the cool things that's coming in JAX-RS, I believe it's targeted for 2.2, but again, don't hold that against me, is JAX-RS in a Java SE environment. And so obviously we want to make things smaller. We like the idea of uber jars or fat jars, and it might be nice to get away, to get to where you just have a JAX-RS application. You don't have a lot of extra things. Now you can basically create a JAX-RS serving environment in a Java main method. And so this is an example. I think of our 5th draft of the JAX-RS spec. It's just a minimum example, and it has some Bootstrap APIs where you call JAX-RS.start, pass in an application that you're interested in, pass in additional details that might include things like what port do you want to listen on, etc. That'll get you back an instance, some kind of instance that you can then use, and then you can use that instance to stop the server when you're done with it. If you want to learn more, this is the issue we have, and it also has a link to a pull request that we've been using for these kind of samples. Type-safe client APIs is something else we're considering in JAX-RS. A lot of JAX-RS vendors have gone off on their own and developed a type-safe client API. CXF and Jersey, RESTeasy, all have their own. And in MicroProfile, we've gone on and tried to take the best of those vendors' ideas and bring it together into a standard MicroProfile REST client. And so MicroProfile REST Client 1.1 was released back in December, and 1.1 was just recently released. The idea there is that you have your REST client doesn't look like clientbuilder.build.target.blah, blah, blah, that has a lot of boilerplate code that doesn't apply to your application. And so we want to bring that into JAX-RS. And so it'll look, I guess, again, sorry, I apologize if it's started to see in the back. This is what your JAX-RS client today looks like. And so in this example, you're trying to check out some books by Arthur C. Clarke. And it's just, there's so much boilerplate, right? You say, here's the books I want to check out. I create a client instance. I create a web target instance that points to that URI. I then invoke it, and then I have to iterate over it. And then down here, I have to go back and actually check it out. This is what the MicroProfile REST client looks like. You have an interface that represents a library service. You have get methods to get books by authors. You have deletes, I guess, is what we're using to check out, and puts to check back in, and additional stuff for special ordering. And then your code in your application looks a lot cleaner. You say, from this library service, you just call a method, get books on by author, pass in your author name, and then check it out. It's just a lot cleaner and a lot nicer. The other thing I guess I should point out is that using CDI and MicroProfile config, you can actually inject it, and you're not doing any of the boilerplate stuff up here, right? You don't have to worry about web targets and clients and things like that. The last thing I want to talk about for the future is better CDI integration. In 2.1, we have CDI integration. It basically is unchanged from 2.0, but we'd like to make add a few more niceties to it. Like, for one thing, right, we currently support multiple injection mechanisms with @context and @inject. We'd like to get to a point where we're just using CDI. Other technologies like JSF has already made that move, and we'd kind of like to follow so that CDI is the dependency injection engine for Jakarta EE. The other thing is lifecycle. We saw that on my SSE example where I annotated it with application scoped. That's actually not part of the spec. That's kind of something that most vendors support that, but to be truly portable, we want to make that formalized. So some of the proposals that we're discussing is to use inject instead of context. Some of those things might need to change. @inject doesn't work with method parameters. So in cases where you're injecting your @context here as an HTTP headers, you might have to move it into a field instance or an instance variable. Things like query param will remain the same because that's injected by or not injected, that's invoked by the JAX-RS runtime. Other things, the runtime delegate is more of an SPI, so that's more important to implementers like myself, but those will also become CDI managed beans. So again, what I'm hoping for, and this is more me, and I won't necessarily speak for the entire JAX-RS community, but my idea would be that we would deprecate things like @context in 2.2 and then remove it in 3.0. That gives people a full release to get used to the idea that @context is going away. And then it also gives vendors an opportunity to, it basically makes it optional. So if they're not using CDI it now, they don't have to until they get to 3.0. And then, like I said, we definitely want to formalize the idea of non-default life cycles and allowing CDI to control that. So in summary, big ticket items for JAX-RS 2.1 is the reactive client and ServerSent Events. There's an awful lot of power in those two technologies. Here's a link to the Java doc for the additional changes I mentioned. We'd definitely love to have more involvement in the community. We've got a lot going on with those 3 features. We've got a few other things that are in the works. And so if you're interested, please take a look at our Eclipse page. Any questions?
Maybe I missed it. You had mentioned how you were going to talk about how to plug in RX Java or Flow.
No. So I mentioned that I was not going to talk about that.
Oh, okay.
and
now you are.
Yeah. Well, the reason I don't want to talk about RX and Flow at this point is it's an optional part of the spec, and I worry about things like portability. And so in 2.2, which I guess what I'll say is we'll want to make sure that it's something that's portable across multiple vendors. And at this point, Flow isn't available because it's in Java 9, and JAX-RS 2.1 depends on Java 8. And then the other thing with RX Java is it's another dependency, and that's why it's optional, is because it's not baked into the spec APIs itself. So yeah, so that's why I didn't want to show that code, because you can do some cool things with that, but it requires additional things beyond what the spec provides. Good question, though. Yes?
We all generate a lot of our JAX-RS code. So when we hear about things going for deprecation in one release and then possibly disappearing in the next, it'd be good to have some sort of idea of what the timeline is for these releases. Are we talking about a year between releases, 3 years?
I don't know that
6 months?
My guess is it won't be 6 months. So the question, just for the recording, is basically, is there a timeline for when things will be deprecated, when things will be removed, and just overall release? The timeline, I can't speak too much to that. Part of it is we're gated, and to some extent frustratingly so, by everything getting moved from Oracle over into the Eclipse community. We've been able to make a lot of progress with what's there now, which includes basically the APIs and the reference implementation with Jersey. We're still missing the spec, I believe, and we're still missing the TCK, and all of that stuff has to be done before we can even declare a Jakarta EE8 release, which would be essentially JAX-RS 2.1. As I understand that timeline, that's supposed to be completed by the end of the year. So I can't say if that's 3rd quarter or 4th. After that, then we can start talking about JAX-RS 2.2 and eventually JAX-RS 3.0. And I would say, if I had to guess, 6 to 12 months after the release of Jakarta EE8. But that's just a guess. I'm sorry?
Is that 6 to 12 months for JAX-RS 2.2?
Yeah.
So it's not immediately from...
Right, correct. You're welcome.
cartridge, get compatible with the cartridges, and after that next year, a new one with JAX-RS, is it correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
And the 3.0 comes after that.
Correct.
With the cartridges after next year, right?
Right.
Have we agreed, like because I know this part in the past, we can we are allowed to introduce backward compatibility.
We are allowed
to make a backward incompatible business. And we use APIs and in the past,
we cannot agree, right? It's basically up to the spec process, and definitely we will need to duplicate some.
Yeah,
so definitely, and but we don't want projects to use too much, duplicate too much.
Yes.
Because it will break backward compatibility possibly. We want to duplicate something which is not used, which is fine, right? Yeah. So anyway, all duplications or all exclusions or all backward compatible cases must be reviewed by their either with the spec committee or with some kind of expert group or platform, we don't know yet, right? But definitely will be reviewed by some region, right? And accept it.
After the application, the next stage is implementation, right?
Yeah.
And coming up on like real way for the backward compatibility.
Right.
So yeah, this is done with them very clearly.
And that's cool though. I mean, that's what you expect.
Yeah, but
There's point to deprecate and then take something away. That's totally different from just breaking something, which of course you would never do in software.
Yeah, but in the past, the DSR was not too much.
Yeah.
As far as the compatibility.
Good questions. Is there any others? All right. Thank you very much.